Welcome to this explainer. When you're watching a fighter jet roar past or a stunt plane tumble just above the runway, it really just feels like pure magic. But behind all that heart-pounding spectacle is an incredibly rigorous, highly structured system of rules and precise timelines. So today, we're going to unpack the invisible safety net that makes these breathtaking aerial performances actually possible.
So, have you ever actually wondered how airshow pilots get away with doing what they do? I mean, under standard federal aviation regulations, what's known as 14 CFR Part 91, flying upside down at 500 feet over a crowded spectator event is strictly forbidden. No exceptions. These rules are there to keep everyday airspace safe, right? They mandate minimum altitudes and restrict aerobatics over populated areas. So the really obvious problem for any event organizer is, how do you legally and, more importantly, safely execute extreme aerobatic maneuvers when the standard rulebook specifically outlaws them?
Well, the answer is the Certificate of Waiver, or the COW. You can kind of think of this as the ultimate permission slip for the sky. This official document, which is FAA Form 7711-1, doesn't just tell you to ignore the rules. Instead, it authorizes aircraft to actively deviate from specific regulations, like those minimum altitudes, but only under very strict conditions that guarantee an equivalent level of safety for everyone on the ground. Now, event organizers actually confuse two really vital documents all the time: the Certificate of Waiver and the Certificate of Authorization, or COA. Here's the difference. A certificate of waiver actively bends existing flight rules, like allowing a plane to fly below a safe altitude. A certificate of authorization, on the other hand, permits specific activities, like a massive parachute jump or a rocket launch, but it doesn't actually waive any underlying rules. So knowing exactly which bureaucratic path you need to take is step one. And that bureaucratic journey kicks off with FAA Form 7711-2. That's the application for that coveted certificate. Submitted to the local Flight Standards District Office, or the FSDO, this paperwork is intense. It requires detailing literally everything, from the exact regulations you want waived, to the specific aircraft you're using, to the exact geographical boundaries of your aerial box. And look, you can't just hand in a quick sketch on a napkin. The FAA treats the airspace like a giant 3D box, and every single inch of it has to be accounted for. Organizers have to provide a highly specific topographic quadrangle map. It needs to be scaled exactly at 1 to 24,000, and it has to pinpoint the flight lines, the spectator zones, and even the emergency dispatch locations. It is incredibly precise. Now, as we all know, bureaucracy moves at its own special pace, and for aviation events, these timelines are completely unforgiving. The FAA highly recommends getting your application in 120 days out. But 90 days? That is the hard, non-negotiable deadline for complex air shows. It's 45 days for military flyovers, and if everything goes perfectly, and I mean perfectly, you'll finally get your approved certificate just 15 days before the event.
But what happens if you, say, make a mistake on that dense application? Well, that brings us to an absolutely critical number: 30. 30 days after receiving your application, the FSDO must notify you of any discrepancies or omissions. But more importantly, 30 days prior to the event itself is the absolute deadline for the FAA to formally notify the organizer of their approval or disapproval. If you hit that 30-day mark and your safety plan is deemed unsatisfactory, your event is grounded. Period. The whole shebang is off. Of course, having a safe airspace means absolutely nothing if you don't have safe people operating inside it. So the FAA requires some really rigorous credentials for every single person involved. The airboss directing the show, they need a specific letter of authorization. Parachutists need valid USPA licenses, and air race pilots need current credentials. You can't just show up and participate because you own a fast plane. You have to categorically prove that you belong up there. And the absolute most critical credential for those stunt pilots is the SAC, the Statement of Aerobatic Competency. And you don't just get this by passing your standard flight test. A pilot actually has to demonstrate their specific dynamic maneuvers in front of an authorized industry evaluator. If you don't have a current SAC card for your planned maneuvers, you're staying on the ground. No exceptions. Things get even more complex if you're trying to feature sanctioned military teams, like the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels. First, you have to complete a very specific Department of Defense document, DD Form 2535. Next, the FAA actually comes out to complete an on-site feasibility study, just to ensure the venue can even handle high-performance jets. And if you fail to secure that final airshow waiver prior to the event, the military cancels. And yes, that leaves the organizer footing the bill. So let's step back for a second.
What exact rules are we actually bending here? Well, under standard Part 91 rules, an aircraft has to stay at least 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle in a congested area. But under a special military waiver, they can fly non-aerobatic passes as low as 200 feet above occupied structures, provided they are safely separated from the spectators along a designated route. That is the real magic of the waiver. It brings the action so much closer to the crowd through calculated math and strict safety parameters. Now, to protect this highly choreographed dance up there, organizers often have to establish this sort of invisible shield in the sky, which is known as a temporary flight restriction, or TFR. This legally prohibits any transient, non-participating aircraft from just wandering into the waivered airspace. If your airshow features aerobatics exceeding 200 knots outside of highly controlled airspace, a TFR is absolutely mandatory. It ensures that a local pilot taking their Cessna out for a Sunday spin doesn't accidentally fly head-on into a performing fighter jet. I know, the paperwork, the topography maps, the 120-day timelines, it definitely seems like this overwhelming mountain of bureaucracy. But this incredibly meticulous process is the vital foundation of safety. It's literally the reason we can look up in awe, completely trusting that the chaos in the sky is actually a masterclass in controlled precision. So now that you know about the incredible, invisible safety net that gets woven together before a single engine even starts, the real question is, are you ready to claim your piece of the sky? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the clouds.